Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you'll gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you are not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself, and we're glad that you're here. Today, I'm here with Daniel Nowoselski. Daniel is an advocacy manager for hospice palliative care at the Canadian Cancer Society. He was also a caregiver for his own father during a time that he was both working full-time and finishing his degree. Daniel, we're so thankful that you're here with us today to share not only your professional expertise, but also your personal experiences with us.
Thank you for having me.
On Time to Talk, we like to create this space where Ontario caregivers can connect and share. And hopefully through our conversation today, Daniel, we can gain a little bit more insight into your journey. And my hope is that one of our listeners are going to find something that they can take away with or that they can identify with as well. And we want to learn more about the importance of diverse health needs and caregiving as well. So let's talk about how your caregiving journey began. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you again, Michelle, for having me. There's definitely been a track record in my family of having loved ones with chronic illnesses, and we know that we've got to step up when that happens. My turn really happened when my dad started getting much sicker during the pandemic. He had a number of chronic conditions, but really the aggravating concern was that his breathing started to get worse in June and July of 2020. And obviously a very difficult time to have breathing issues to get that right level of support. So we were being really COVID cautious, but it was clear that his condition was worsening. And even though, despite the precautions, we needed to make sure that he is getting the support that he needed. The chronic conditions he had included one called nodular regenerative hyperplasia, which is a concern with his liver. And then he also had pulmonary fibrosis, which means his lungs were slowly hardening. But what ultimately came to pass is that he had developed a very rare condition called hepatopulmonary syndrome that affects only about 10 to 15% of people with his liver conditions, where his liver was starting to affect his lungs. And it meant that ultimately his body was not absorbing the oxygen that he needed, especially when he stood or sat up, limited his ability to move around, to do things to take care of himself. And so we really needed to step up. My mom was caring for him full time, and I started living with them regularly in order to support them through that journey. And the responsibilities included everything from the chores that he would have done around the house, but also helping him with things like eating, shaving, bathing, and helping him do things that he wanted to still do, like exercise and things like that while he was undergoing care. As his condition worsened, he was unable to do things like go down the stairs or things like that. So we had to make some changes around the house and support my mom through navigating all of those particular challenges was really difficult. The whole journey ended up being more and more full-time for all of us involved. He got his formal diagnosis in October 2020, and the only treatment that's available for hepatopulmonary syndrome that they know of is a double lung and liver transplant. But the transplant team had evaluated him and said his condition had progressed too far, basically, for there to be a chance to survive. So we transitioned over time to palliative care, and ultimately he passed in February 9th, 2021.
I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I can identify a little bit. I also was a caregiver for my own dad. Different circumstances, of course. Sounds like your father's condition was relatively rare. There's a lot that you have to explain to people. So I'm assuming there's a lot of figuring things out as you go along, putting the pieces together. How can I step in and help? And on top of this, if I'm correct, you are working full time and you're also a part-time student at the time because you were finishing a degree.
Yep.
So that's a lot. It is a lot. And I wanted to acknowledge that. So given all of that together, what was the scope of emotions that you felt when you were finding out that you needed to be a caregiver for your dad?
Well, it really evolved quite quickly. The journey wasn't that long, but it, very overwhelming. And especially it was happening all during the pandemic. So I think the number one feeling was fear. We didn't know what was going to happen. Like going to the hospital with someone with a lung condition, especially during that time, was really terrifying for all of us involved. And even as his journey progressed, you mentioned rare conditions and the challenges around that. We had really great support from our care team, the folks that ended up coming into our home, really reluctant to get that support because of the pandemic. And ultimately, we never had the same PSW twice. It's just the nature of the time and the
Wow.
turnover. So every time someone came into our house, we had to kind of re-prepare ourselves to re-educate. And it was a little bit frustrating, but we were really lucky that most of the PSWs that came in were really responsive to what we told them and were willing to listen to us, given his unique set of conditions that he was dealing with. But that was especially confusing, given that, none of us necessarily have a medical background, and figuring out how to communicate, like, no, it actually has to be done this way because he can't just sit up. That means his oxygen level is going to drop, so he needs to recover after. So we need to be strategic in how to be efficient in like getting him dressed or things along those lines to support him. It was also really intimidating to come in and take that challenge on. My dad was exceptionally driven, a type A personality, and I love and respect him for that, but he had very high standards for himself and for others. So to come in at a time where all of us are, not maybe at our best emotionally, given all of the feelings involved, to come in and support him as best he could, trying to meet his standards for himself and for others, that was really hard. It was definitely dealing with that frustration of him not being able to do stuff for himself anymore, escalating quite quickly. That was really hard to kind of meet him where he's at and figure out how to support it. I would also say, I think the other emotion that was really like, I had this really strong determination through that time because my parents are both accountants. My sister's an engineer. Those are not professions known for their, let's say, emotional capacity. So coming in to step in to have these conversations about feelings at this time where all of our feelings are confusing and difficult, but being able to keep us focused on what was most important at that time, that was a really strong priority for me. And I really knew that I had to show up emotionally for everyone else. And I would say the last thing I really felt during this time is grief. People usually think about grief only as, after someone dies, but there's a lot of grief that comes before, especially I think in the pandemic. Like, he passed in February 2021, and that was the time where people were starting to get vaccinated, and there was all this thought about hope and that we could return to a new normal. And I was at the same time processing the fact that, like, there was no normal for me to go back to now because I was about to lose my dad. So that was a really hard set of feelings to go through at that time, and to like start grieving all of the things, not just losing my dad, but also losing all the memories I was going to make with him, whatever my future was going to hold. Processing those feelings at a time where like we just didn't have anyone that could be around us, that was really hard to process all of that all at once.
It's an incredibly complex situation that you found yourself in. It's complicated and challenging enough without the additional layer of the pandemic on it. You did touch on that whole idea about talking about the feelings and the emotions and managing that.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the hardest things to do during that time, because sometimes I felt as a caregiver, it's like, okay, we're just going to get through. We're going to put one foot in front of the other and take care. But
Yeah.
I had a newborn when my dad was diagnosed. So it was a lot. One of the hardest things to do was have the conversations about feelings instead of just getting all the things that you have to do when you're caregiving done. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because you wouldn't think that that's always the hardest thing to do, but sometimes it's just like, it can't just also just be ticking off all the things off the box. We have to be human with each other as well at the same time and acknowledge that. Did you have any strategies that you used to balance at the time, looking back on it now, being a caregiver, also a part-time student finishing a degree, and a full-time professional, all at the same time, full-time work, doing all those things? Did you have any strategies that you can see that you implemented?
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard to navigate, and I was really grateful that I had kind of certain supports in place beforehand. So I already had a relationship with the therapist that I was seeing, and that really was helpful to kind of that evolve around those things. I really leaned onto my partner for letting go of some responsibilities that I had around the house, like in our home and things like that. I just had to trust him that he was going to be able to take care of those things and really back off and relax. I really focused on what I thought was most important, which was being there for my dad as emotionally and physically as much as possible. And so that meant I couldn't be all things to all people. Even at work, I had to be pretty strict about my hours and like trusting myself that like, no, laptop's got to close now, and I've got to go back to caring for my dad or things along those lines. Or, if my assignment, I have to be fine with a B or a C on this assignment and not just strive for the A. And I have to be okay with those things, because ultimately, as much as I want to do well at those things. I have to do enough to focus on what was most important and what I had the time for, which is caring for my dad. Setting those priorities for myself was really important, I think, in order to making sure it was able to go through it all, but also still making time for things like therapy or things that were going to bring me joy and recover, as that was the only way I knew I was going to be able to show up for my dad or show up for my mom through this journey, or my sister, in order to make sure that we could communicate and that I wasn't going to get overwhelmed with the feelings of frustration or the grief that we were all experiencing all at the same time. It takes a lot of energy and bandwidth to have those conversations and to process those feelings and to cope with other people having those feelings. And just, I needed to decide where my energy was most important and be kind to myself about where that meant my energy was not going to go as a result.
Yeah, I think that's valuable in terms of saying, okay, maybe we can't give everything 100% right now.
Yeah.
It's not possible, but I can prioritize what I can give to what segment of my life at the time. And it sounds like you had a great support system as well, which is very important. You did bring up your workplace. So let's talk a little bit about that. Your profession, your role at work gives you a very valuable perspective on this and does tie into your situation with your dad. So let's talk about what it is that you do.
Yeah, so my job, I work at the Canadian Cancer Society. I work on our advocacy teams. That means we lobby to governments to encourage them to adopt certain policies or certain practices in order to make sure that we can support people with cancer and their loved ones, no matter what stage of journey they're at, and also to prevent cancer from occurring. Now I work on all of our files related to palliative care. And before then, I was working specifically in Ontario and lobbying the government of Ontario on certain policy changes. I was really fortunate to be working at the Canadian Cancer Society during this time. I mean, it's a very understanding environment. Our jobs are to show up for people who are sick and their families. So, it was nice. They should understand it, but it was really nice to have that everyone involved that I work with and work for, they really lived up to their values in this case and were really exceptionally supportive during this time. And working, and especially in this job, when there are certain last minute things that come up, and we are responsive to what government is doing, so we don't necessarily always control our schedules. I was really happy that I was really fortunate that the team that I worked with was able to work with me to balance all of those responsibilities in this case, and to reflect those things. But in terms of how I dealt with those things and they came up, my bosses were really flexible in allowing me to shift my hours. So my mom, one of the things that she does is she goes for a walk with some of our neighbors that we've lived with beside for many years. And she goes Monday and Friday mornings. So I knew that was the time that I was going to have to be the full-time person for my dad in that time. So I asked to flex my hours. So I worked on Saturdays in place of the Monday and Friday mornings in order to flex those hours. And that was they were really open to that possibility. I think the fact that all of us were working from home helped, but really making sure that I could move those hours around so I could use my time accordingly. That was great. And I found it really important to make sure. I had a boss once whose advice was the thing that he hates the most is surprises. So I really tried to operate that as best as possible. I was open with them of what was going on when the different challenges were coming up. And I made sure that when there were appointments or when there were things that were going to come up that required shifts in their schedules, that I warned them as early as possible in advance and had an idea around how I could move my hours around or how I could move my responsibilities around to do that. I was also really clear with my bosses around any deadlines that I thought I was in danger of missing or when I was going to need to work on certain projects, so that if someone needed to step in, or if my dad passed sooner than expected, and that I could transition those responsibilities off quite quickly. And that made it a lot easier for me to feel good about saying no, actually I have to go. They already knew what they were going to have to work on in my stead. And that really helped, I think, make this as smooth as possible. And I really, and while we were in a workplace that was really good about talking, expressing sympathy and talking about our feelings as going through this, I really approached the conversations from a performance perspective, that I was not going to be able to show up for work at this time, emotionally, physically, even if I could show up physically. Talking about it from that way really made them understand that I couldn't be there, not that I didn't want to be there. It made it easier for them to flex our hours and adjust accordingly in order to make sure that they could figure out a way through this time, given that I was still going to be working and still in that, but obviously a little bit distracted during this period. Yeah.
And understandable. So it sounds like, of course, as you mentioned, it's fortunate that you worked already for an organization that would sort of need to be open to this, because that's really what they're all about, is working with people that are sick and their families. So they need to be open-minded. So what it does sound to me is that your strategy in terms of how you approached, and let me know if there's anything else, and if you would recommend anything else to anyone going through this. But so communicate early and come up with solutions, say, this is what I need and this is what I can do in terms of a performance side of thing to make this work for you. Come up with a plan for your employer about, I need XYZ change to my schedule, but this is how I'm going to make that work for you. Would you say that that's sort of how you approach things?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think in communicating that and understanding that my bosses were also able to find a solution that worked for them as well, and making sure that worked. And so like the flexible hours and working from home, that made it really easy to do the work that I needed to do to care for my father during this time. And I think having that clear communication and that clarity around roles and responsibilities and who I can lean on in when something goes wrong means that, we're not planning on the fly. We already have this in place. And that meant that, like, it wasn't falling to anyone else unexpectedly when unexpected things came up.
Right.
I'd say the other things that were really helpful that my employer did to support me. One, my boss was really good about walking me through our different types of leave, including our bereavement leave policies, and that was really helpful for me, knowing that I didn't have to panic or think about vacation time or all of those things. That it just, like, I knew I had these days that I could use, and then whatever other time I needed, I could use accordingly. And they also made a point of pointing out the emotional support that was available to me through my benefits plan. Like I said, I already had some of those supports in place, which was great. But even just knowing those additional supports were there when I needed them, I think, especially if I didn't have those relationships already in place, even just pointing out that these services are available is really helpful, and it's up to me to choose if I need them or not.
Over a third of caregivers use their personal finances and savings to pay for the needs of the person they care for. Financial hardships are common when it comes to being a caregiver. Luckily, there is financial support for caregivers through government agencies and community organizations. As a caregiver, you may be eligible for caregiver benefits and leave. The Ontario Caregiver Organization has made a list of financial support and grants. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca for more information. Now, back to our episode.
It does sound like you felt supported by your employer. Is there anything else that you would suggest to someone that finds themselves in the position of being a caregiver, anything that they should probably do when approaching an employer, especially if they're not sure that their workplace culture or that the organization that they're with is as supportive as the Canadian Cancer Society is?
Yeah. So I think there is a fear for a lot of people that they don't want to show vulnerability or challenges at work. I would suggest that it's really important for your boss to know what's going on with you. And if they're going to use it against you, or if they're going to do that, like, that's a reflection on them, not a reflection on you. You need to decide ultimately what's most important during this time. And I think that's easy to say when your job's on the line, your income and those types of supports are available. But I think ultimately, if they don't know, they can't support you, and you need to give them the shot to support you or not. If they're not going to, so be it. But I think figuring out how you can communicate to those things. You can also, like, the benefits plan, bereavement leave, those types of supports, you can look into yourself. Like, most employers have that information available, or your employee handbook. So look into those options, I think, to explore as well. The last thing I would say is there's lots of really great information online about things like the employment insurance compassionate care benefit, or those other support programs that exist to support caregivers through this time. And your care team can often also connect you to those resources as well. So the fact that you might have employment, like income opportunities that might be available to you if you can navigate the system or get supports to help you navigate the system. So take time to ask those questions, because your needs are as important as your loved one, because you're the one, especially if someone's at home, you're the primary caregiver for that person and care provider. So you need to figure out how you're best be able to show up for them.
And I think you touched on this before when you were talking about, okay, I have all these things happening in my life. I'm personally a human being with my own life. Plus, you have work, you have school, and then you're caregiving for your father. You have been quite pointed about the fact that you're very happy that you put as much as you possibly could into the caregiving for your father. And I think while maybe it's a situation that none of us really want to be in, I think it's safe to say that. I don't think anyone, I would suggest, and let me know how you feel this, regrets being there for a loved one that needs them at a time like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, like everyone has their own family responsibilities and all that, but I think ultimately, I wanted to come out of the experience knowing that I couldn't change anything else about my dad's condition or anything else. The only thing I could control was ultimately how much I showed up for him and whether at the end of it, I would feel like I did everything that I could. And like, this is this life-changing event that I am experiencing. And so I just focused as much as I could on that, of making sure that at the end, wherever the end it was, whenever it happened, that I knew that there was nothing more I could have done for my dad. I just didn't want to have any regrets about that. And so felt very fortunate that if I was going to go through this experience, that I came out of it knowing that I didn't have any regrets about that.
I understand that. Let's talk a little bit more about something that crosses over into the professional and it did with the personal as well, and that's the importance of palliative care. What is it? And if for anyone that might know, really fully understand what palliative care is and why is it important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of misconceptions about palliative care, so I'm always happy to talk about it and dispel some of those. So palliative care, the technical definition is that it's an approach to care that aims to improve the quality of life of someone with a serious, often life-limiting or life-threatening illness. It aims to prevent and address suffering and the other challenges when someone is ill. This includes things like pain and symptom management, social, spiritual, and emotional support, and addressing practical challenges you and your family, you and your loved ones face when someone is sick. It also includes grief and bereavement support for you and your loved ones. And palliative care can be provided in any setting and can help you be in or stay in the place you want to be for however long you want to receive care. It's often thought of as a particular stage in someone's illness journey. That's not true. It's also only thought of as something that for someone who is dying, and it can and should be given alongside curative treatment. Often, whether it's cancer, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's ALS, MS, whatever the illness might be, people often think only have that conversation when they think someone at the end. But often, a lot of these symptoms and the pain involved in some of these illnesses can be managed. And so talking to a palliative care team they have specific expertise in helping those things along those journeys and to help facilitate those conversations that you need to have when someone is quite seriously ill. Palliative care teams are often interdisciplinary, so that means they can offer a wide variety of supports and a wide variety of people that you can work with, which is really helpful. And it can also help you understand what is happening and better understand those questions that you want to ask about how long you might have or things that what might happen from here. They often have the expertise to help you through that. So talking to a team early can help you plan better for what the final stages might look like or wherever the trajectory ends up going. It can help you through those supports and make sure that you have the comfort and dignity and support that you deserve, no matter where you live and no matter what setting you'd like to receive care.
So because it's such a misunderstood thing, or it can potentially be, how it makes it more difficult to talk about sometimes with people. So how should caregivers approach this topic with their care recipient? If you can share any advice on that.
Yeah, there's definitely a stigma associated with palliative care. It's always interesting now introducing myself and talking to people about what I do, how people react to those things. And so like the technical, it's not only about death. Like there is a lot more to palliative care than just talking about those final days. But I know that that's really hard a conversation to broach, especially people have a firmly ingrained idea of when palliative care is supposed to kick in. And I also know that when there's so many other changes happening in someone's life, when caring for someone who's seriously ill, having another conversation, like unpacking this and unpacking stigmas, that's a very difficult conversation to have at that particularly emotionally difficult time. like personally, I came from a family where we had a lot of conversations. But it's a big family, so unfortunately, that means a lot of funerals. And so we're very comfortable talking about death, and we're talking about our wishes for one another. And my dad had a will in place. We had all of these conversations that we'd already had, and so that also made it a lot easier for me to show up for him because I knew what he wanted and I knew how I could help him. But a lot of other folks I know are not equipped to have those conversations. So I wouldn't approach it by forcing them necessarily, but frame the conversation about what you need in that journey. Like you as a caregiver need for your loved one. There's a great team, Dr. Cianciao and Dr. Sammy Winemaker. They have this philosophy. It's called hope for the best, plan for the rest. And I really think that's a really important approach to have these conversations where you're not talking about it from a perspective that you're losing hope or giving up. We are planning for the possibility that these negative things might happen and how are we going to address them. So I think the number one piece of advice that I think would help facilitate this is plan together what questions you are going to need to ask your care team in advance. So that can be especially I think when you're in front of a doctor who's giving you information about the treatment and the curative part of your care, you forget to ask about some of these other elements, such as like managing pain until things get better, or managing certain symptoms, so things like incontinence or things that might be awkward to talk about, and especially when you're focused on treatment you don't want to focus on. But if you plan them in advance, you can think through all of these different elements and aspects to ask for that support so that you're ready to go before you're facing your care team and asking those questions. And I think there's a really big temptation to just focus on whatever it's going to take to get someone home or to get someone get someone better, especially when you have limited bandwidth. But you really need to ask, just instead of just asking about what they need right now, to think 1 or 2 weeks ahead, because no matter how efficient or equipped your care team is, it's going to take time for them to be able to meet your needs, especially if you're talking about different equipment you might need at home or adjustments you may need to your living experience. So asking questions about what it's going to look like 2 weeks from now and then what supports they're going to need can really help you make sure that when you need those things, you can get the support that you need. And I think framing it from that perspective of uh, what you're going to need in advance, and considering those options means that it's not about you think your loved one is dying. It's about how do we make sure you are living as best as possible, living as fully as possible for as long as possible, which is ultimately the goal of palliative care. And I think that's really important, to have those conversations about what's the best way to live for as long as possible, not talking about it in terms of the negative aspects of where a trajectory might go. There are documents called advanced care plans that can guide you through some of those conversations. Your palliative care team or your doctors can probably connect you to some of those. And if not, there's great resources online that exist for different illnesses that can help you support through those advanced care plans. And I think that's a really important thing. And like lastly, as I said, palliative care is not a stage of illness. You're not just in palliative care, you're receiving palliative care. It's an enabler of care. So they're going to, and like the palliative care team are going to help you receive the care when you need it, where you need it, and what you need. And so figuring out what that means together for everyone, it's a really important conversation to have all together. So regardless, it's a really difficult conversation to have, and so you should be gentle in having it and be kind to yourself and trying to figure out how to do this. And it is going to be really emotional, and so no matter how hard these conversations are, if you don't have that clarity, it's hard for you to know whether or not you are giving that, like being able to support your loved one as best as possible. And so as difficult as it is, as reluctant as you might be to have those conversations, they need to happen. And they're like, it's not going to change the trajectory whether or not you have those things, but it is going to change your ability to provide care. So I think approaching it, especially talking about it from you as a caregiver, how best I can help you, I think is ultimately the most constructive way to have that conversation.
Well, I really wish that I had talked to you before the journey that I was on as a caregiver, because this entire sort of process that you've just walked us through, and the concept of hope for the best, plan for the rest, and the importance of planning and how it can ease everyone's experience. And I will say the palliative care team that I encountered with my dad was wonderful. In fact, I was terrified to go into that process, but once we encountered them and were under that team's care, everything was better. Everything was so much better, because they really were absolutely really special people, the team that we worked with, and made things better. So I assume that, I think you pointed out, it's a very scary conversation to have, potentially. It's a difficult conversation, if I could frame it differently, but I assume that once you have that conversation, it can ease a lot of concerns and fears and stress for the caregiver and the care recipient. Would you say that?
I would definitely think so. I think a lot of anxiety stems from not knowing what the future is going to hold, and especially when it's these big scary illnesses and these big scary moments of your life where you know your loved one may not be with you that much longer. Like that lack of control is what feeds into that anxiety and that fear and that staying up at night. And so whatever you can do to kind of assert a little bit of that control, and I think often that comes from having conversations about like what your loved one needs and wants to support them. And so once you have those answers, and once you have that clarity, like that can really help you stay focused on what you can control and what you can do for them, as opposed to all of those unknowns that you can't, like, you don't have any control over. My dad was very clear that he wanted to stay at home as long as possible. And so it was never a debate. It was never a, discussion with the care team about moving him. It was like, we knew that he wanted to be at home. So what were the steps we needed to do at home to make that possible? So it was, I could have the conversation with my employer about flexing my hours. So I knew those were the days that we needed the most support. So I was going to be at their house at that time, and I needed to be there. I like, whether it's, what equipment we needed to make it possible for him to be at home. Like, if we at one point, we need to move him from his regular bed to a hospital bed. So planning in advance when that was going to happen was only possible because we knew, like, those steps needed to happen as a result of what he wanted. So we could do those things because we knew the answer of what he wanted. And I'm so grateful for that, because we met his goal. He passed away at home, and I knew that's what he wanted. And so we could make it easier. It made it a lot easier for us to show up for him, and also made it sure that he understood what we were doing and why we were doing it, because he knew that we understood his goals and we were working towards that. And it also made sure that, like, we were able to advocate for him in the results that he needed, because the care team wasn't saying, well, like, maybe he'll end up in a hospice, or maybe he'll end up back in hospital, or those things. And we said, no, he's staying at home as long as possible, so we could advocate for him and make sure that he had the resources that he needed. And so I think ultimately it gave us the power, it empowered us to really be able to show up for him the way that he needed us to show up for him. And I'm so grateful that we had that, and that I could come away from the experience knowing that, like, we did everything we could.
Working caregivers are ordinary people providing physical, mental, and emotional support to a family member, partner, friend, or neighbor while balancing workplace demands. There are ways to better support caregiving employees so that they can continue to share their valuable knowledge and skills in the workplace while caring for those who need them. Our suite of tools and resources provide you with key tips and strategies that can be built into existing workplace initiatives, providing benefits and finding the right solution for you and your employer. To download our toolkit or to learn more about our resources, visit ontariocaregiver.ca. And now, back to our episode.
You mentioned a few different things that caregivers can find online. Do you have any specific resources that you would direct our listeners to?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of Canadian Cancer Society has a lot of resources for people with cancer. We have a ton of information on our website, but we also have a forum, cancerconnection.ca, that you can talk through different aspects of your journey, talk to other people who have different types of cancer, and talk about the unique trajectories on that. I also say what's great about the forum is that also there's a general forum, but there's also one for patients and one for caregivers. So if you are a caregiver and want to ask specific questions but don't want your loved one to see it, there's also that possibility as well, and that can be really helpful. I think a lot of time for those resources. I mentioned Dr. Xiao and Dr. Winemaker. They have a great podcast called The Waiting Room Revolution. If you're into podcasts, I would strongly recommend that one, especially the first season is really helpful in guiding people through different steps and thinking about that. I would also say, there's also a lot of communities have hospices, even if you don't need their services for your loved one, especially if you're looking for mental health resources or psychosocial support or grief support. They have a lot of great grief and bereavement programs to help guide you through the journey before someone dies, after someone dies, and for your loved one who is dying. They can help provide support for their grief and figuring out how they're going to navigate those things. So I really encourage you to check out those resources if there's a hospice or hospice program available in your community to support you.
Every caregiving journey is different, but often we can see parts of what we're going through in other people's stories and other people's experiences. Would you have any particular advice to give to someone that might be on a caregiving journey that feels similar to yours, or maybe one that's different? Anything that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think two pieces of advice that I think would have really helped knowing going in. So the first one is like, you're going through something really hard, so it's going to be really hard. And like I say that glibly, but I think at the same time, I think there's this, for instance, there's this one appointment that my mom dropped off my dad to, and she kind of drove off right away. And we were trying to navigate those things, and we forgot something. Forgot his health card, which he needed for the appointment. And I asked my mom after, like, why did you just drive off? And she was like, well, I didn't want to hold up the traffic for someone who really needed to drop their loved one off. And I was like, we have my dad, Barry, is terminal. We are the people who need the extra support and help. So this is the time where we get the extra support, and we need to take advantage of that to do that. Like, we're in facing these really difficult challenges. We need to respect that in and of ourselves and say that we need the most help right now and be okay with that. And so I think, especially when we're facing such difficult challenges and this really sensitive time, I think if I'd been able to say, no, we need to take time and space for the fact that we are going through this exceptionally difficult time, I think that would have been really helpful to me, and to assert that earlier in this journey, I think would have been particularly helpful to remember and keep in mind. I think the other piece of advice that I would say is remembering what's important. And like, as I've stressed, like, I'm so, like, my dad, Barry, he was so such a big part of my life, and I miss him so much through that. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to go through this any other way, because I think I'm so fortunate to come at it with no regrets, because I knew what he wanted, I knew what he needed, and like we were so close as a result of going through this journey, and knowing that I could show up for him in that way, man, I would do anything to have him back. But if I was going to lose him anyway, I came out of it knowing that I did everything I could, and there's no version of that I would trade for. The only thing I would trade it for is having it back. So I'm so grateful. And so remembering and having that sense of what is most important during this time and being able to stay focused on it meant that I was also able to show up for my mom and my sister. Like, I understood why they were so frustrated and angry, and why they had such short tempers during this time, because we all, none of us were sleeping, none of us were going through this big emotional challenge. And being able to show up, the only thing that could keep us going was showing up fully for my dad. And we were only able to do that because we had all these conversations, and we were able to focus on what he wanted and what he needed. And so I'm just so grateful that I could do that, and I could show up in that way. So staying focused on what is ultimately most important during this time of being there for my dad, and being there for my loved ones during this time, it's just the only way you're going to get through this with any sense of sanity. Not that I really felt that sane coming out of it, but any sense of getting through this and being able to move on. Being able to do that without regret, I think, is just such a powerful thing that I'm so grateful for.
Well, absolutely. And Daniel, we are very grateful for your time today and for you sharing your story, both on the personal side and then also your professional insight, which has been very valuable. Both of those have been very valuable to us. So thank you so much for being here on Time to Talk.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.